I'll start then by just noting something about the word university and its medieval origins. University comes from the word universe, and it involves a sense of the purpose of the university being about the whole of creation, being about the interconnection of everything, of ideas. Today we're hearing about the intricacies and the specificities across the sciences and the humanities and the social sciences. There was a time when this range of disciplines it was imagined, possible for one person to compass within themselves. This is the admittedly gendered idea of the Renaissance man. I'm going to be speaking today about one candidate for the coveted title of the last man to know everything. This is him, Thomas Browne. He is a doctor and essayist. His writings are a ragbag of everything that was worth knowing in the 17th century, plus plenty that wasn't as well. He was a scientist, an antiquarian, a biblical scholar. He was a busker of philosophical ideas, as opposed to a schematic thinker. However, he's largely remembered as a literary figure for his lush and lovely language, for his combination of the wistful and the sublime, and for his sweeping descants upon death. He has an impressive roll of admirers. I'll come to some of those as I go on. If he's relatively unknown, it's because he is wholly unplaceable. In terms of discipline. He matters, though, because he writes about everything. He is voracious in his interest, from the highly recondite to the wonderfully ridiculous. But he writes about everything because of a deep-set belief in the interconnectedness of things. Certainly he's capable of specialism. His notebooks are full of anatomical and scientific detail. But for Browne, you couldn't separate off one discipline from another without draining it of its worth. It's not straightforward, though, to convey the demented plurality of things, the cacophony of the universal in finite text. And this is what he aims to do. He writes on the cusp of everything, on how one discipline is connected to another. And in an age when our disciplines are so atomized, that itself has some intrinsic intellectual importance. Today, then, I'm going to tell you about his writings, variously luminous, mystical and scientific. It's part of a project that I'm involved in with scholars scattered across America, Europe and the UK, editing an 8-volume edition of his works. I'm not going to talk much about the process or the nature of historical scholarship involved in that, but rather about him and his ideas. To give you a flavour of his range, I'll just begin by noting something of his vast anti-encyclopedia, Pseudodoxia Epidemica. This is a vast treasury of error, of everything that the world has ever got wrong. Title means an epidemic of false belief, and his purpose is to root out fakery. Is that me? To fact-check the whole of antiquity and the scientific world. The work established his scientific reputation. It was rated by Robert Boyle, by John Evelyn, by figures of the Royal Society, and it consists across 7 books of the whole of the curriculum of the early modern world. He talks in books 2 and 3 there about mineral and vegetable worlds, about errors related to animals. He talks about historical, geographical, classical, biblical and pictorial errors as well. Everything worth knowing. But if we move from the book titles to the individual chapter titles, things start to get a bit strange, if not ridiculous. The titles of his chapters have been described as looking like titles of limericks by Edward Lear. He writes, for example, about whether crystal is only ice really tightly compacted. No, it's not, he concludes. He writes about whether, as was sometimes believed, a bear gives birth to an informous lump and needs to lick it into shape. No, it's not, he explains. He writes as well about whether, and he's the origin of this discussion of whether Adam and Eve had navels. His discussion of this doesn't involve too much biblical material. He uses obstetrics and he uses gynecology to discuss the idea of where a navel comes in some great detail. He writes about unicorns, about mermaids, about mandrakes. You could construct the entire plot lines of Harry Potter from out of the contents of Pseudodoxia Epidemica. To castigate such errors, then, is his purpose. But he's also somewhat regretful at having to dismiss their delightful silliness. He's melancholy about the loss of this cornucopia of fantastical beliefs. I think between the book titles and the chapter titles, we have an important dynamic here. We have the serious structure of the world shot through with the absurd, shot through with an absurd that connects the disciplines. He can be a precise scientist, but he also has, in the words of Coleridge, a little twist in his brains. Tony Kushner, the contemporary playwright, author of Angels in America, it talks about the poetics of his scientific thought and a voluptuous style that, he says, melts the tight angles and the straight lines of the Euclidean universe. This has something of Browne about it. I'll give one more critical mention of him from Virginia Woolf. The Bloomsbury crowd loved Thomas Browne for his style, for his language, talking here about his delirious variety. Woolf says, "Now we're in the presence of a sublime imagination, now rambling through one of the finest lumber rooms in the world, a chamber stuffed from floor to ceiling with ivory, old iron, broken pots, urns, unicorn horns, and magic glasses full of emerald lights and blue mystery." I like the idea of a lumber room. I have to admit I didn't know what one was, but Google explains to me it's where bulky and disused things are kept. And this describes Browne quite precisely. He is a writer of disused ideas, of bulky and unwieldy notions, with tremendous shafts of sunlight and dust penetrating through them. I'll give a little bit of biographical background to him. Here he is, outside Primark in Norwich at the moment. He was born in 1605. He was schooled, born in London, schooled in Winchester and Oxford, and lived most of his life in Norwich. That's his life. He followed the path of most prospective physicians of his age, in that he travelled to the prestigious European universities, because, whisper it quietly, English medical education was pretty substandard in the era. Anyone wanting training needed to go abroad. He spent considerable time on the continent, worn out and exhausted by the 30 Years' War. The continent, that is, not Browne. And he returned to an England about to engage in the Civil War. But in his time abroad, he went to Montpellier, to Padua, to Leiden, each of which had their distinct traditions, each of which had a fairly significant influence on him. In Padua, in 1632, he encountered the world of Andreas Vesalius, the theatrical anatomist who established Padua as a centre, the European centre of anatomy, in which anatomy became something of a philosophical spectator sport. We see here his Vesalius's famous lovely pictures of contemplative flayed figures walking in the landscape, a strange combination of philosophy and death that he finds here. At the bottom of the picture, I don't know whether you can see them, there are dogs, there are monkeys, there is bad hygiene going on in this dissection theatre that we have. More importantly, though, is what Vesalius and Browne after him wants to understand as a philosophical and theological montage. It blurs the boundaries between medicine, between metaphysics and theatre. One I won't go to Leiden yet. One physician described this. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way here. No, go back. Hold on. Oh, right, okay. Beg your pardon. Stay there for a moment. One physician described this scene, the dissections, as being as though they were conducted by somebody contemplating the siege at Troy. At times there would be music at the side of these live dissections as they went on. It was a scene perhaps reminiscent of what Bedlam was to become later, which people would attend for social as much as scientific, the ostensible scientific reasons. Now, in Leiden, where Browne went afterwards, and Leiden was perhaps better known for its chemical medicine, but it also had a rather stupendous tradition of anatomical theatricality. It had flamboyant collections. It had emblematic anatomical rooms with embalmed bodies, with paintings. A couple of the details from this. Down the bottom on the left there, we have an Adam and Eve about to pluck an apple, which they have pre-died from. On the right here, we have a man holding a flayed skin, and I believe he's mansplaining the nature of flaying to the woman next to him. Up above, a series of skeletons holding flags with adages on them. Pulvus et umbra sumus, we are but dust and shadows. Homo bulla, man is a bubble. Now, Browne's writing has something of this same cacophony about it, this kaleidoscopic sense. And this medical background that he encountered in Europe was something that fed fairly directly in to his first work, which is Religio Medici, the religion of a physician. The title is meant to be an oxymoron, a paradox that a physician should have a religion at all. It's difficult to say what exactly the work is about by subject matter because it's digressive, it's diffuse, it ambles across any number of subjects. Browne is a master of indirection. The centre of the text is less any particular subject than Browne's particular tolerance. Put any subject you want in front of him, be it a Platonic mystery, be it medicine, be it foreign food, and he will respond with a torrent of wit, of goodwill, of ingenuity. What Religio Medici does, and what made it a text that attracted a lot of attention, is that it captures a voice in the middle of thinking, undecided, undogmatic, which in the turbulent years of the Civil War was distinctly fresh. One topic tumbles into another, all are connected, everything undergoes a relentless process of transformation. Here's one quote from it, speaking to his sense of disciplinary interchange, those strange and mystical transmigrations that I have observed in silkworms turned my philosophy into divinity. Let me say, by way of closing, a word about historical scholarship and the humanities more broadly. It's customary to note, apologetically, how valuable the humanities are in their turnover of billions. Thomas Browne wouldn't care about this. They matter because we are human. They matter because of the intrinsic, necessary intertwinedness of subjects. And I began by noting the origins of the word university and how it demands that we think about the fullness, not the narrowness of things. This is what Thomas Browne does with wit, with rhetoric, with a little twist in his brains. Thank you.